Welcome to Political Business. It's been a big week in Westminster and it's only Wednesday, so no policy this week, but we're going to unpick what an eventful week means for you.
Starting off, we'll be discussing what's happened in number 10 over the last few days, but also then take a longer range look. What could a change of Labour leader, an occupant of number 10, mean for the direction of this government and of the country?
And then a quick look at what this all means for the opposition, not just the Conservatives, but Reform and Nigel Farage too.
Well, let's dive straight in. Nathan, it's been a busy few days in Westminster. Might you give us a quick summary of what's been going on?
Yeah, absolutely. Last week, I think on this podcast, you said the Mandelson story had a long way to run, more to come out and more things to come out about it.
Wise, very wise.
It was. I think even you may not have quite understood the scale of things that was about to happen over the next few days. So a quick recap. Look, we had the PM seeking to get ahead of some of the latest revelations about the vetting process by removing Mandelson's peerage. He retired from the House. That was only last Friday, if you can think back that long. And he admits at PMQs last week that he was aware of some of the things, which but the vetting process was flawed effectively. By Sunday, Morgan McSweeney has resigned, the Prime Minister's all-powerful Chief of Staff. He's resigned by Sunday afternoon, following a weekend of messages from Labour MPs and others calling for somebody to fall on their sword. Monday morning, Tim Allen, the Director of Communications, only in post for 6 months, resigns and departs number 10 as well.
Very sad news.
And then by Monday afternoon, Sawad is there on a platform calling for the Prime Minister to step down for the good of the country. Then all eyes on the cabinet, effectively, waiting to see whether they would tweet in support. And, you know, as a Conservative, I remember going through this 3 or 4 times over the last few years, where you wait for those messages from even your most ardent critics to say, we need to get behind the Prime Minister. He's doing a good job. Let him deliver the change the country needs. David Lammy, Deputy Prime Minister, comes out first, and then one by one, all the other members of the cabinet come out. I think Angela Rayner was very near the end. Wes was somewhere in the middle, recording a podcast, I think, at the time that all of this was going on. So look, finally the PM gets on the front foot a little bit, has a meeting with a load of Labour MPs on Monday evening to basically say, I'm here to stay. I've never lost a fight. I'm going to keep going, and we all need to get behind me. And to be honest, with the cabinet behind him, Anasawa looks slightly isolated up in Scotland. But the recriminations then sort of start, and effectively the PM is safe for now, seems to be the general consensus, but clearly severely weakened after very, very public calls for him to go, and a very, very unstable time for the Labour government and party. So, Kevin, tell us what this means for Keir Starmer, for the Labour Party generally, and this government.
Well, I think what's happened over the past few days, and definitely over the past 48 hours, is members of the cabinet, and certainly members of the Parliamentary Labour Party, peered over the precipice and stepped back. Nobody I speak to, I was down on the terrace House Commons on Monday night after the Parliamentary Labour Party's meeting, where the mood was surprisingly, I would say positive, was surprisingly not as febrile as one would expect it to be. But it was very clear that despite all the encouraged tweets and Facebook posts of support for the Prime Minister, particularly from backbench MPs and junior ministers, what they were saying in private was not the same as they were posting in public, which was fundamentally they think the Prime Minister's done, that now is too soon for him to go, conference is too late for him to stay. So currently, as it stands, I think a large number in the Parliamentary Labour Party think the PM is on borrowed time. Why is it too early? The first is looking at the situation with the two potential challengers, or those that two favourites inside the Parliamentary Labour Party, to either mount a leadership challenge or indeed enter the fray should a leadership challenge be called. First being Wes Streeting. The view very much is that Wes has been at the eye of the storm for the past 48 hours. There were rumours. There were rumours from briefing from Number 10 that Wes was involved in Asawa's move, was potentially going to follow him. What's amusing, in fact, you were with me at the time before all this happened, when I was told by others that Angela Rayner was behind the Anna Sarwar press conference and that she'd been speaking to over the weekend and that she was behind it. So clearly everybody's, jumping at shadows in and around Westminster. But the fact is, Wes Streeting has fairly or unfairly, but probably unfairly, been attacked by those that say he was close to Peter Mandelson. He released his WhatsApp exchanges with Peter on was it Monday? What day is it? On Tuesday.
Tuesday.
On Tuesday, in order to demonstrate that he has quite serious points of difference with Peter Mandelson, which I think has gone some way. But fundamentally, I think the view is that the Parliamentary Party has to be clear of the Mandelson issue, i.e. the investigation taken place, messages published before leadership contest can take place, particularly if Wes Streeting or anyone on the right of the party is to be a credible challenger, potential to win that and take the leadership. Also, Angela Rayner, the view is that she cannot challenge for leadership while she's under active investigation by HMRC for non-payment of tax. So hence today's too soon, but party conference, which will be September, will be too late. Of course, anything could change in that time. I think it's been a roller coaster of emotions for the Prime Minister and certainly for Number 10 staff and the Whip's office over the past 48 hours. It's fair to say on Monday evening, people I spoke to from Number 10 team were positive. I think they started the day thinking that their boss could be out of a job and they'd be out of a job by the end of the day. I think it was genuinely possible that Keir Starmer could have been gone.
It felt like it,
by
didn't it?
the end of Monday. Events can achieve their momentum very quickly. I think they thought they got over the worst of it by Monday evening, and then of course, and that they'd managed to damage one of the challengers in Wes Streeting, and then and by all accounts, the cabinet meeting on Tuesday morning went well. Although again, there were reports that whilst everyone clapped the Prime Minister in, Wes Streeting was unable to find the use of his hands, and that was noted by cabinet colleagues. I think if the Number 10 team thought they were in a stronger position than they entered, say, Sunday afternoon or that long 3 days ago. But then there was another scandal which headlined PMQs today about what the PM knew and didn't know about the appointment of his former communications director, his former communications director, Matthew Doyle, who previously also worked for Tony Blair, who took the peerage 2 weeks ago, announced in December, but had, as exposed by the Sunday Times, before he was elevated to the peerage, but after that elevation was announced, the intention to elevate was announced, that he had campaigned for a council candidate in Scotland who had been suspended by the Labour Party as he'd been charged with child sex offences, which he was ultimately convicted for. Matthew Doyle's defence is that he was standing by a friend, and at the time he was charged but not convicted, but equally there was an error of judgment. What's happening at the moment is Number 10 saying Matthew Doyle lied to them. I think the facts are quite challenging when it comes to what Number 10 knew and when. So I suspect that who knows what happens tomorrow. What that's done in the background is build a real head of steam around criticism of the Number 10 operation as a boys' club, particularly by the Women's PLP, and Keir addressed the Women's PLP at 1 p.m. this afternoon. Women's PLP being the group of female Labour MPs in the House of Commons. Has also been meeting one-on-one with leading women. And indeed, Harriet Harman, the former deputy leader of the party, has called on Keir to appoint a first Secretary of State, de facto Deputy Prime Minister. We have a Deputy Prime Minister, who sadly is a man, to be a woman in the cabinet in order to give women's voices a greater share of voice around the table. And in Downing Street, it is worth saying, most of the senior political positions in Number 10 are held by women. So after the departure of Morgan McSweeney, Keir Starmer's two deputies, Jill Cuthbertson and Video Alex, and both very well respected in Labour and beyond, they've been elevated to acting Chief of Staff. After the departure of Tim Allen, Communications Director, Sobin Asemi has been elevated to acting Director Communications Director, and Political Director, who's done a pretty good job of managing the PLP, it has to be said, over the past few days. Amy Richards is also female. So actually, Number 10 is now, I don't think there are any senior men. And the Cabinet Secretary is about to be, or has been, let go. And that's yet to be communicated when his package is confirmed and will be replaced by Antonio Romeo. So actually, we have a real a real change in face and gender in Downing Street. But this is this has led to just more unease in the Parliamentary Labour Party. So Keir Starmer I think he's safe for now. The externalities are still what they were before. We've got the by-election on the 26th of February in Gorton and Denton for various reasons, but Labour MPs are coming back from there astonished that actually Labour seems to be holding up pretty well on the doorstep. And also, of course, there's still the local elections on May the 7th, and elections in Scotland and Wales. What's interesting for Anas Sarwar is I think most people accept he's quite a wily politician. I don't think he would have gone over the top, as they say, and called for Keir Starmer to go if he didn't think there were people behind him. Of course, he turned round and nobody was there at all. And those who've been around politics as long as I have will remember James Pennell, who tried to bring down Gordon Brown, doing the same and being left with absolutely nobody. And it was David Miliband that was supposed to have resigned and probably would have brought down Gordon Brown. So very interesting there. Reminded by Labour MPs on Monday evening that this is a genuine difference between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. The Labour Party is more loyal. It's less, less careerist and less venal than the Conservatives, but it's culturally different,
less efficient,
much more loyal, much more humane, as you'd expect to politics of those on centre left. But it is the case that Labour does not get rid of. They could have. They could have moved them on. I think number 10 have done a very good job of briefing out that look at the markets, what can't worse, could destabilise, could be out for a generation. So I think fundamentally, the Starmer, unless something happens, there's a big reset. Let's see another reset. Then I think he is on borrowed time, and that probably is after May the 7th.
I think you talk about the markets, and it was worth just watching their reaction and some of the indicators on Monday as this was sort of unfolding in the news. And, I think they were pricing in uncertainty and therefore becoming a little bit erratic. But it does speak to this. They're reacting negatively to any prospect that Starmer and Reeves might depart number 10 and number 11, respectively. But I suppose one of the reasons for that is because it's not clear what will fundamentally shift should there be a new leader, who that is, and what would actually happen. I mean, maybe just reflect on that. We know that, the conventional wisdom is now that Keir Starmer will not take Labour into the next election. I think very few MPs, if any, you can find who would say that. You've just said, before May too early, post-conference conference too late. So who's likely to come in? What does it mean for the directional travel of the Labour Party in policy terms, and how should the markets and business be responding to that?
So I think, first of all, in policy terms, it's probably a good place to start is the messages of Wes tweeting to Peter Mandelson, where he said that it's not clear to the public what Labour is for. And I think that is at the forefront of many MPs' minds as well. So part that. There needs to be a clearer answer to the question, what's Labour for? What's its policy vision? In wonkish terms, what's its view on political economy? What political economy does Labour want to execute, and what's its North Star policy terms? Combine that with large moves by what we call the soft left, or those more to the left, the more traditional Neil Kinnock type politics within the Labour Party and the Parliamentary Party, of what Mandelson and Morgan McSweeney means, and Tim Allen. And they say it is just not just about personality, it's a departure and rejection of Blairite politics, centre-left, some would say, liberal, social democratic politics, and particularly economically liberal. I think that is, if there's to be a leadership contest, that will be part of the debate. Genuinely, what's the policy direction? I think the centre of gravity will, as always in Labour, will pull the Parliamentary Party towards a more leftist, interventionist, potentially more at ease borrowing, it has to be said, view. This has been said by Andy Burnham yesterday. He did a speech to the Institute for Government where he basically said we need a more left-wing politics. Ed Miliband, who said yesterday on the Day programme that we need to look at the issues of class inequality, class warfare. That's interesting perspective. Ed did put that agenda to the country and the Conservative majority government was returned. First time a governing party had increased its majority in the history of British parliamentary politics. So I'm not sure the precedent's great there for Ed, but well done for giving it a go. He may well end up our Prime Minister. So I think that and that's where the majority of Labour MPs are. I think they'll be dragged. And anything that looks and smells like Blairite politics, that will become a toxic term, I expect. And so I think it's almost inevitable. And this is what number 10 is saying as well as a reason to keep Keir Starmer, which could be enough to keep him for a while, that it's inevitable that Labour would drag to the left. Now, so in policy terms, that would mean, very explicitly actually, most MPs I speak to, nationalisation of the water industry.
Yeah.
Looking again at public utilities and electricity and electricity markets, going harder and faster on social housing and state house building. We've only ever delivered huge amounts of social housing in this country when the state's done it. So I mean, it's not an unreasonable position to take. More investment, borrowing to invest, and probably a much more hard-headed view on taxation, actually. Not necessarily individual taxation, but maybe looking at things like, taxing assets more than just earned wealth, and also potential another run around on issues like corporation tax, for instance. So I think it would be more what you call traditional Labour agenda. That's stressed. So many would say that's a return to the politics that's been rejected by the public over, certainly my generation. Some would say that's an acceptance of actually the inequalities of our time. People like Ed Miliband dress that up as saying people like Ed could be Britain's answer to Adani in New York. I think that's interesting. I'd like to see that explored more. But I certainly think that's what it means. It's a more leftist politics. There is currently nobody really propounding a centre-left Blairite world view in policy terms at the moment. That might emerge, not least when it comes to an actual leadership contest and people setting out what the intellectual framework is. Now, what's the challenge with that? These might be the right answers, by the way. That people can't afford. The cost of living's high. People can't afford to buy a home in large parts of the country. So therefore, maybe these are the beginnings of the right answer. But the real challenge is that's not what the public voted for. It's quite far away from the the economic envelope that was set. So there'll be calls anyway. There'll be wailing from the Conservative benches about the need for a general election when they famously delivered general elections after their leadership change.
Maybe Nigel Farage will be calling for it this time. I'm not sure the Conservatives want an election anytime soon.
If he manages to find the Commons, he seems to have lost. Need to find his way in there very often. But it is. I think it is quite far away from what the public voted for. I mean, they might vote for it. What does it mean in policy and electoral terms? So we talked about this on Monday, Nathan, when we were speaking to some leading architects in London, saying that actually part of the Labour core vote or the Labour electoral coalition is not today the romanticised version of what some on the left believe. This kind of horny-handed son of toil. Coal miners, industrialists, unionised workers is actually, middle class, with professionals, predominantly in the public sector, and in quite secure jobs with quite decent pensions. Much more intellectually on the left than either that kind of traditional working class view, or indeed actually those that would consider Blairite as well. So I do think you'd see a direction in policy and electoral terms which would be about Labour facing into, for the next general election, the progressive coalition, looking at people who Labour have lost to the Greens or the Liberal Democrats, or to form some sort of coalition with the Greens and the Liberal Democrats and the Nationalists in Scotland and Wales. Famously, the Rainbow Coalition that David Cameron so successfully attacked the prospect of in 2015. I think that's where the party could go. With Morgan McSweeney leaving, there's been lots in the parliamentary party quick to say there should be a rejection of what was called the Blue Labour agenda, hard rhetoric on immigration and the like. So I think a potential, not just a potential change in leadership, but the dynamics in the PLP, the Mandelson scandal, will actually lead to substantive change at the moment in policy and policy outlook for this government that I think most people really appreciate. And that's important for business. It's important for the general public, but it's important for business as well. It would mean a massive change in posture for lobbying.
And you look at the sort of proof points that might come from people who are pushing for that agenda, and you say, well, in Scotland, the SNP are probably going to perform very strongly in the elections. Plaid looks set to perform very strongly in Wales, and across London, losses to the Greens and the Lib Dems. So the narrative around needing to move to a more progressive, leftist agenda is probably going to become louder. So,
absolutely. And actually it does mean one of the criticisms of Keir Starmer is that his perceived strength, his managerial and non-ideological, actually isn't appropriate at the moment. We're in a battle of ideas between the populist right and then potentially the populist left. and that we will potentially see an actual real political blue water between the leftist parties and those on the right. And the country may well be given quite a distinct choice at the next general election.
So, I mean, I think what does this all mean for opposition parties who really ought to be having a field day and cleaning up with the government troubles? I think what's interesting is very often these stories are taking place in Westminster and the public don't really notice. It's very much a Westminster bubble story. But there's some evidence this week when asked the question, what news story have you heard about the most this week? Mandelson and Epstein feature but as number one, which is very unusual in terms of what is effectively a political story, because it's the public have heard it, they've listened to it, digested it, and formed an opinion on it. And so, it's interesting to see how opposition parties capitalise or not on this. There's a lot of discussion in the Conservative Party at the moment about how, Kemi Badenoch was the one who got Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's questions last week to actually admit that he knew some of this before appointing Lord Mandelson as the ambassador to the US, former Lord Mandelson as the ambassador to the US. But this doesn't seem to be having a massive impact in the headline voting intention for any of the parties, actually. What we've seen in the last week is a stabilisation. So Reform have continued with their rallies, their kind of we're getting ready narrative, did a big set-piece event in Birmingham on Monday in the middle of the day whilst telling everyone to work from home, telling everyone to get back to the office, which, the irony was not lost. But really presenting themselves as, the future government, and this plays directly into their narrative. It's working for them. But there was some interesting polling from More in Common this week about party leader head-to-heads. Now, traditionally, election campaigns have been determined by two things. One, or general election campaigns. One, who do you think would make the best prime minister? And two, who do you think should look after the economy? If you've got a lead on the economy and you've got a lead on party leader approval, you can run a very good campaign on that, which tends to lead to a good election outcome. See David Cameron against Ed Miliband in 2015, as you mentioned, all about the economy, all about who you think would make the best prime minister. And on those head-to-heads, Badenoch is winning all four head-to-heads. So Starmer v Badenoch, she's winning. Badenoch v Farage, Badenoch v Davey, Badenoch v Polanski, she's winning all of them. And actually that's giving Conservatives some hope when combined with an uptick in the kind of approval ratings on who you think would best manage the economy. So even though we're not starting to see any of that filter through to the headline voting intention yet, it does give the Conservatives some bones of a campaign. So you'll probably hear less talk about immigration. Reform will continue to talk about that. More from the Conservatives on the economy, and more from the Conservatives about, the genuine personalities of the leaders who could be going forward to the country. So watch this space to see how that one evolves.
I do wonder if it is a case of who do you dislike the least.
But it was
adds up to the same thing. I'm not sure it's necessarily. It's clearly the best outcome for the Conservatives, but the base. I mean, the poll rates, the individual leadership ratings. For Keir Starmer is the most unpopular prime minister since polling began.
Ticked down from Liz Truss,
which is quite impressive. We'll certainly get me record books on that basis alone. And it's something that Labour MPs were reminding each other off on Monday and Tuesday, which was a good day is just not being on the back foot and having a total meltdown, but actually ultimately the mood music isn't great. And I think generally, and also More in Common polling and focus groups show, the public are it's a bit of a plague on all your houses for politicians, particularly at the moment, which is something as well. I think one thing on politicians just reminded me when I was chatting to MPs over the weekend, those who've been on the doorstep on Saturday and on Monday and Tuesday, the ones that were saying publicly, people are calling my office and saying, don't get rid of the Prime Minister. I said to a few of them, I was like, really? Are people really doing that?
Actually doing that?
They actually are. Like, my office has been recording it. And then it's shown up in polling today. Is that actually it's very clear the public don't want a change or they don't want they don't want to return to the type of churn, not to say the same thing as keep Keir Starmer the individual, but they don't want this rapid fire, constant drama. They've experienced ones that don't want it again. And that's something that Number 10 are leaning on quite heavily to say, look, decisions are taken over the long term, judgments are taken over the long term. We don't make decisions in the beat of a TikTok cycle. So I think that's quite interesting, where the public are actually, they might have views on what's happening with the Mandelson scandal. They'll have views on parliamentary conduct, but ultimately, perhaps Westminster itself just needs to calm down a bit.
Agreed. End the chaos. Well, that's it from us for another week of political business. We'll be back next week where who knows what might have happened. We'll be covering it all and telling you what it means for you and the business community.